Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, Dr. Marcus de Freitas. Dr. Marcus is a visiting professor at the China Foreign Affairs University. He is a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South and the former visiting fellow of the practice at the Botanic School of Government, University of Oxford. Well, Dr. Marcus, and welcome back to the show.
Good to talk to you, Will, as always.
Absolutely, sir. Such an honor to have you back on the program. Before we talk about this trade jeopardy between U.S. and Brazil, the breaking news came out. The current Ukrainian President Zelensky is the first foreign leader to visit newly elected British Prime Minister. Now, the meeting signified in many levels, especially regarding the war in Ukraine. Dr. Marcus, you're the expert for international policy and also international relationships. I want to start by asking you the question, how important it is for the Ukrainian president to pay attention or even pay a visit to the newly elected British Prime Minister. And what does that mean? And how do you think that such visit can send a strong signal to Washington? Your thoughts?
I think, Will, that, if you look historically, the UK has always had problems with the Russians. And that is something that the British cannot get over. In the 19th century, the greatest concern that the British had was an alliance between the Germans and the Russians, where the Germans would provide the brains and the Russians would provide the resources. And the same thing happens in the 21st century, when there is a fear, particularly by the United States, of an association or close work relationship between Russia and China. So because of that, the British have had an important role in sustaining the support of NATO to Zelensky and to Ukraine. This war doesn't make any sense anymore. The Russians have proved not to be as capable as people thought that they would, and extending the dominion. And nobody, 100% of the people can easily affirm that Russia would not have the capacity to evade the remainder of Eastern Europe. But there is this sense, sustained by the British, and particularly by Boris when he was prime minister, that, they have to somehow contain Russia. And if possible, ideally, they would, fragment Russia into 4, 5, 6 different countries. And somehow that would generate instability, and, you would never have a fully nuclearized country. And the Ukraine war somehow gives the West an advantage because, for the Americans, for instance, it is a war that, the Ukrainians are fighting on their behalf. It's a proxy war. They're fighting an enemy of the United States, and the Ukrainians are doing the dirty job of somehow affecting the sovereignty and Russia overall, right? And if you recall, I remember there was an interview by Mitch McConnell, that he said that the Ukrainians were helping a lot the United States because they were fighting a war that was helping the Americans, rebuild the money that was the Americans are getting paid now for the NATO equipment that they are providing. And also it was a war that no American blood was being spilled. So in a way, it was a war that somehow pleased the establishment of the United States. So Zelensky goes to the prime minister to secure the support of the British, who have played this role somehow of, being the number one supporters of Ukraine in this war against Russia, in a war that no longer makes sense, neither for Russia nor for Ukraine, and much less for the Europeans, because Europe has been the one that has been mostly affected by this war. Fuel prices, the situation in Europe, the economic, the lack of economic growth, and all this, you can pinpoint to this war.
Dr. Marcus, I'm sure that you aware and you're mindful that recently the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, had a few heated exchange during the testimony regarding the war between US and Iran. As a matter of fact, that under the Department of War, Hegseth continued to ask more money to support the US military, and despite the fact we've seen so many innocent lives within the military force have lost, which is rather tragic. The reason why I'm talking about this is because I want to tie in the war in Ukraine. Again, there's no denying, there's no surprise that from Washington's perspective, it's all about winning the credit. It's all about looking good and for the image. But clearly the voters has lost the confidence regarding Trump's promises to end the war for Ukraine. But right now, more voters start to even get more frustrated about the war between US and Iran. So putting everything together, by seeing Zelensky visited the newly elected British Prime Minister, does that mean the Trump administration right now officially send a indirect or unspoken message to the voters to say the war for Ukraine, it's in their hands? Right now, the priority for America, it's all about ending the regime of Iran or hoping to change the regime for Iran. How much would you agree with that?
Well, I think that the Americans started this war, which is a war of choice and an asymmetric war, based on false premises presented by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, that gave the impression that this was going to be an easy war. And I'm not the one stating this. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, affirmed it, that if the United States did not attack or did not act, that Israel was going to do it. So they were basically pushed into action in this situation. So it's a war that, Netanyahu has been pushing for the last 30 years. And he didn't even manage to convince Trump during his first term to engage. But now we do not know what happened, that Trump, decided to do it. And in Iran has proven to be extremely resilient in this war. And the memo of understanding for me basically was a recognition by the United States that they had lost the war. And not only did the Americans lose the war, they gave Iran a much more powerful tool than the nuclear bombs that they could have. Because the Strait of Hormuz has had an enormous damage all over the world, despite the fact that Trump was saying that the United States was not going to be affected. It has been affected, and it will be affected. And that is the challenge. Trump created a problem he doesn't know how to solve. And whenever he attacks, he kind of builds the resilience and he kind of builds the resistance and the leadership of Iran and of the people. So, because for the United States, it is a war of choice. For the Iranians, it's a war of survival. It's a very different approach on how things are going to happen. So despite the fact that people do not like the regime in Iran and all this, there is a race to the flag because the Americans are attacking, and Trump's rhetoric doesn't help, saying that he's going to obliterate the nation, he's going to, scratch Iran from the map, and he's going to do all these things. That doesn't help the political discourse. So the United States really has found in a situation that they have basically lost. And Trump has to save face before his electorate, which did not support any engagements for wars. Remember, Trump was elected based on the fact that he was promising no more wars.
That's right.
And now this walk in the park that he mentioned doesn't seem to have an end, and doesn't seem to have an end on how to solve it, because it will require the Americans, and particularly Trump, to have the humility to recognize that there is, a tie or that they have actually lost. And considering the ego of the personalities involved, it is going to be very hard for them to accept it. So he needs an off ramp, and the off ramp did not happen with the MOU, and I do not see how things are going to change unless you know new elections come to the United States and the new president changes everything. Because I think Trump is going to keep doing this to save face or until the midterm elections happen and then he can change something.
Dr. Marcus, let's talk about this publication written by the current president of Brazil, Lula, through the Washington Post. And the article is entitled Lula to Trump, No One Will Defeat Us Through Lies. U.S. tariffs on Brazil are a strategic mistake. In the letter, I want to read a few statements to you from President Lula regarding President Trump's strategy on tariff. This is what he wrote, and I quote, "In my conversation with President Trump since then, I have stressed that we do not need to share the same worldview to pursue a mutually beneficial relationship between our countries. After all, we lead the two largest democracies and economies in the Americas." End quote. Dr. Marcus, from your perspective, one thing that we don't understand or we seldom to bother ask the question is, when we think about the tariff war, when we think about the trade war, it sounded to me that President Lula not only talked about this is a strategic mistake, but also emphasize that Lula and Trump don't share the same worldview. What does that mean today when we think about leaders don't see the worldview on the same page, even though we are living in this uncertain, unpredictable, and a completely disordered world today? Your thoughts?
Well, disordered world that we think is something that the Americans have been spreading around because this new world order that we're building is not U.S. centered. So I always hear that, we're having this tumultuous period and the world is in disorder and disarray. I said, well, let's hear where this is coming from. Because, we did not reach this point based on the fact that everything was going well. Governance in the world has been, somehow managed by very few countries who have not been willing to expand the circle. So I think that we always approach this, there is a disarray in the world. Well, there's a disarray because the Americans are no longer going to be the number one player. That's okay. The world has been like this for a long time. And, we don't have to have this hegemon always leading the process. And it's actually better if we don't have one. Because the world is more polycentric, right? Like we like to think. But and Lula is coming from this perspective that somehow Trump is trying to affect the election in Brazil by creating this tariffs. We know Brazil has issues with protectionism, but the issues of protectionism in Brazil also protect American companies that have been pushing for the market to remain closed to other importers, because nowadays, if they open up, the Chinese are coming. Not only the Chinese, the Japanese, the Indonesians, the Indians, and everybody else. So it's in their interest to protect the market, particularly for these Brazilians and also many American companies that are operating in the country. But also this idea of a Don't Roll doctrine in which, the Americas belong to the United States and they're the backyard. This was something that it was applied in the 1800s. And, it's no longer there. That speech that Trump has may be applicable to Central America because of the territorial closeness and the immigration issues. But Brazil should, somehow hold his head high because those that have bowed or kowtowed to Trump have been really affected by his policies and being mostly uh, frightened and mostly, uh, threatened by the policies that Trump has implemented. I just look into the vassal status that the Europeans have, or Canada, and you see the way Trump is treating these countries. So we need to have some resistance. We have China that has done this with the tariffs in a very wise and constructive way. And now Brazil, uh, I may not have, think that Trump, that Lula is the best president of the country, but somehow somebody needs to show some resistance. And this also comes in a wave of what they call the blue wave of right-wing parties getting elected in South America, and they want to make this irreversible. And somehow all these new leaders want to have these connections with Trump, when in reality, the number one trading partner for everybody is China. So Lula is reflecting this moment in which he sees the United States trying to interfere in a very direct way in the elections in Brazil by raising tariffs, by making things more complicated for the government.
Dr. Marquez, I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, in this letter, President Lula referred the part of the historical moments by mentioning President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he wrote that President Roosevelt implemented the good neighbor policy, which sought to replace the use of force with diplomacy in the U.S. foreign policy towards the region. Of course, when we think about the region, that's the region of Latin American region. So going back to the question, Dr. Marcus, when we think about Franklin Roosevelt's good neighbor policy, compared with what Donald Trump is doing right now, of course, you mentioned clearly many times that we live in different age and we live in different time, and Trump's supposed to be different or expected to be different in many ways. But meanwhile, there's supposed to be some type of diplomacy in the U.S. foreign policy. But so far, we have not seen that. It's all about black and white. It's all about my way or highway. So from Lula's perspective, do you think there's any type of hope or any type of, I don't want to use the word wishful thinking, but again, the good neighbor policy should be in place, or at least to be carried out, so that we can understand how to be a better diplomatic friends? What do you say to that?
I think that President Lula doesn't realize the way Trump behaves. Make America great again. It's not make Latin America great again. It's not make Americas great again. America first. It's not Brazil first. It's not Latin America first. It's not the American continent first. It's the United States. So Trump behaves in a way that, the interest of the United States needs to be number one. And he's right, because he was elected president of the United States, not president of the world. In fact, I don't think the world would like to have Donald Trump as their president, right? If the world had an opinion on this. But, he's the president of the United States. And I always say to my students that Trump is like a last attempt for the United States to control or modulate its decline. But he's actually expediting this because, isolationism is not something new in the United States. Clinton did the same thing. People thought that after the end of the Cold War, with the Americans winning the Cold War, that the United States would be more engaged around the world. It turned out that Clinton just turned inwards and really didn't want to go out there to play the role that the world was expecting them to have. So this isolationist policy is not something new, and actually something old in the recent history of the United States. Uh, so Trump doesn't seem to care about this good neighbor policy. Basically, when he looks into Latin America, he has a dual approach. One, no, actually three, right? Controlling drugs, which is an interest that he has. Uh, Remembering that, the problem also has to be solved in the United States because the distribution takes place in the United States, and many Americans make a lot of money with drugs. Second, migration. And third, the region is a resource supplier for the United States. It's an interesting thing and a little embarrassing when you think that Trump talks about Venezuelan oil as their oil. Now you see that they're trying to work agreements around the region for rare earth minerals. I was glad that President Xi and President Lula had a conversation yesterday in which the Chinese are going to work together with Brazil on mining and refining and making technology transfer on rare earth minerals because the Americans just wanted to buy it down in Brazil. So I think that this is the greatest challenge that we see with Trump. It's drugs, migration, and secure resources. That's what Latin America basically is for him. And perhaps a little playing with Cuba because he wants to, please Marco Rubio, give Rubio some kind of, victory in this whole thing. But, and so that's the problem of being treated as a backyard. And the issue we have is that many Latin American governments and many people in Brazil would accept that kind of treatment from the United States. So that's the big issue and the big challenge. And when we look into Lula and his reaction and all this, we're always thinking, well, is he doing this because he wants to oppose the other guy, or because it's something that is, the essential of his administration, the essence of his administration, to build on this multipolar world where China plays an important role, where BRICS plays an important role, and therefore Brazil will become irrelevant.
Dr. Marcus, I want to ask you the last question. We know this year it's crucial for Lula, especially we'll look at this upcoming election. I mean, again, when we think about the elections, for example, in the U.S., we have midterm election, and it matters to Donald Trump and also to the Republican Party, and particularly to the Democrats. They're hoping to flip the Senate seats and also the House of Representatives. But meanwhile, for Lula, it's also critical, regarding this election. So from your perspective, again, I want to borrow a sentence from his final paragraph in this article, and it says, Brazil's destiny is for Brazilians alone to determine, without foreign interference or subservience. So, Dr. Marcus, from your perspective, how would you evaluate Lula's approach for prepare for this upcoming election? Because again, this is crucial and this is important, not only for the Brazilians, but also to the international community. So from your perspective, can Lula be the one keep on reminding the Brazilians regarding the destiny without any foreign interference? Or perhaps Lula is going to face major challenges because of his attitude or his relationship with some of the partners. Your final thoughts.
I think that when he talks about subservience, is basically referring to the other candidate, Flavio Bolsonaro, who is the son of the former president. And Flavio has been, very prodigal in making many mistakes. One of them was going to the United States and saying that he was fighting for the tariffs until the election. And after the election, it wouldn't be his problem to solve if he lost. Or, Milei from Argentina coming over to Brazil and actually giving a political speech that was totally unnecessary in Brazil regarding support to Flavio. So I think Flavio is a very poor candidate against Lula. Now, runs not against Flavio or against Bolsonaro or Bolsonarism, as they say. Lula runs against his own record. He has been in power for 12 years, and his political party has been in power for 18 years. And the country's not doing so well. The country could have been doing much, much better. And you do not see the government implementing the measures that are going to change things. China has saved Brazil many, many times during the pandemic, before the first government of Lula, but he runs against his record. And if he gets reelected, which I think is likely to happen, it's just not because of his record, but because the other candidates are so poorly prepared and so bad that the political parties that have proposed their names have not really reflected on proposing better names that could be competitive against Lula. So they're going to be discussing superficial stuff and all this. Oh, you support Nicaragua, you support Maduro and all this. But the essence of the policies, they were not going to be able to criticize because many of these candidates really not have developed their own policies regarding their vision of the country. So that's the greatest challenge you have. Both candidates really have no plan regarding the future of the country. Brazil has transformed itself into a constant political fight, but not a fight for who has the best project for the country. And that's the challenge that we see today. So Flavio runs against himself, and he's not going to do well because he doesn't perform well, and Lula runs against his records. But still, Lula has an advantage.
Well, again, we don't know what's going to happen after the election, but we do know that today it's rather complicated and also even more intricate just to understand the foreign policy, especially looking at those unconventional and unpredictable factors. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, such an honor to speak to Dr. Marcus de Freitas. Again, Dr. Marcus, it's a visiting professor at the China Foreign Affairs University in Beijing, China. He's a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Well, Dr. Marcus, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay closer attention to the global affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.